This video is brought to you by Endel. Hey guys, it's Michael here, and today this is a really special video because I just want to take a second to talk about what a sane and reasonable world we live in. A world of equality and meritocracy. One where young people can pursue knowledge freely. I can't say this with a straight face, guys. You know me better than that. That's not true. Today, we're actually here to talk about student loan debt, i.e. the very least sexy way to sabotage your financial prospects for life. Let me know in the comments what the sexiest way to sabotage your financial prospects is. Now, back in June, the Supreme Court looked at President Biden's $500 billion student loan relief plan, which would have helped out 20 million people, and then said, nah, we're good. Now, more recently, two conservative groups sued to block Biden's amended, more modest $39 billion forgiveness plan that would have affected 800,000 borrowers. Meanwhile, 70% of college graduates are in debt, and the most obvious studies in the universe find that this takes a major psychological toll. I'll say it, probably the worst I've felt psychologically in the past 15 years of my life have involved thinking about my student loan debt and wondering, like, why did I do this? Who let me do this? Where does it put me in life? Am I ever going to be out of this debt? Will I have to fake my own death to be out of the debt? If you're someone who helps people fake their own debts and start over, shout it out in the comments.
That dummy worked like a charm, Dad.
Best $600 I ever spent.
So why does freeing people from the burden of student loans trigger so much outrage? What does the political opposition to student loan forgiveness say about our society? And is debt really just a matter of personal responsibility, or is something much bigger going on when young people have to permanently sacrifice their financial prospects to get the education they need to be successful? Let's find out in this video on student loan debt. It's not about morality. Okay, before we get into it, I want to tell you about this video's sponsor, Endel. Now, if you're feeling stressed or overwhelmed to the point where you're struggling to focus on your daily tasks, or you have a hard time winding down at night, or your quality of sleep isn't great, which I can relate to, Endel can help. Endel is a revolutionary app that uses AI to generate personalized soundscapes designed to help you relax, focus, and sleep. Now, the app adapts in real time to personal inputs like location, weather, circadian rhythm, and heart rate to personalize the sounds for maximum effect. Now, here's how it works. When you open the app, you can choose from a variety of scenarios based on whether you want to focus, relax, or sleep. For example, let's say I want to lay down for a quick power nap after a long night of my beloved daughter screaming like she's dying. Well, I'd select the power nap scenario, which gives me a perfectly timed soundscape that will help me relax and get a few extra winks. And these soothing sounds aren't just for show. Endel soundscapes are based on neuroscientific and psychoacoustic principles. A recent survey showed that many Endel users with ADHD, tinnitus, and sleep disorders say that the app helps them manage their symptoms. So if you need help falling asleep or you're struggling to relax, check out Endel today. Now, the first 100 people to download Endel by clicking the link in the description will get a free week of audio experiences. And as someone who struggles with focusing and struggles with sleeping like every day, I really can't recommend it enough. It's definitely worth checking out if you struggle with that stuff too. So link in the description, but for now, let's get back to the show. Now, we all know that debt is just a fact of life. From $37 Venmo requests for overhopped IPAs and bad pizza to housing, education, and medical debts. Americans collectively owe over $1.7 trillion in student loan debt. And that number is just part of the equation. We also collectively owe $1 trillion in credit card debt, a record-breaking financial burden that's worsened by the very stigma of racking up such debt in the first place. Now, with debt so commonplace, it's not surprising that Americans take it for granted, seeing it as something of a necessary evil in our lives. However, we simultaneously judge others for holding debt. Also, let's not judge people. So let's, in the comments, what's the last thing that you put on your credit card that you maybe shouldn't have? I'll start. I got a $1,200 guitar amplifier that I really can't afford, but convinced myself that I really needed. And that's on my credit card statement. Let me know what you got. And we're not judging each other because we're all just people trying our best. Even you. Now, according to a Pew Research report, although most Americans consider debt a necessity in their own lives, they view it as a negative force in the lives of others. The study found that 79% think other people use debt irresponsibly, while 85% say these mythical other people use it to live beyond their means. So what does the moral judgment around debt really mean? And how did debt come to occupy such a central role in modern life? Okay, so to get back to the question of what debt is and how it's ruining our lives, let's look to the work of the late anthropologist David Graeber, whose book, Debt, The First 5,000 Years, dispels a classic origin story about money. Now, you've heard it before. Humans started off bartering, but that was kind of a pain in the ass because it requires a double coincidence of wants, i.e. you need lumber, I need goats. And guess what? I have lumber and you have goats, so how convenient. Now, obviously, this didn't always pan out. So money became a medium of exchange and the rest was history, right? Of course not, guys, of course not. And according to Graeber, this is simply not how things went down. Specifically, he argues that credit preceded currency, i.e. debt came before money. He explains that early human society didn't run on bartering or coins. Instead, it ran on obligatory favors, gifts, and mutual aid, and the expectation that what you gave would be returned in kind. Now, this wasn't quantified debt, but a concept of obligation within a community. Like how when you're back in your hometown, you have to see your aunts, even if you don't want to, and even if they live like 20 minutes outside the city and you didn't rent a car, so you have to take 2 trains to see them and have lunch and drink iced tea, you gotta do it. You gotta do it. If this sounds way more warm and fuzzy than convincing an uptight banker to give you a loan, that's because it totally was. In contrast, bartering, Graeber says, was something you would have done with strangers or even enemies because you couldn't trust them as you would a member of your own community. Now, he says that anthropologists missed this fact for a while because money, especially coins, were easier to preserve in archaeology than credit arrangements. In this way, the idea of quantified debt is a social construct. It developed largely to help people in bigger, more complex societies get along and works as a more formal manifestation of our social network of promises. Now, at the same time, the money that we use to settle debts is also a social construct. It works not because of the inherent value of a $20 bill, but because of our collective agreement that it has a value backed by the government. And money is as much about faith in each other as it is faith in the system. Graeber writes, the value of a unit of currency is not the measure of the value of an object, but the measure of one's trust in other human beings. But here's the thing, the idea that you must always pay your debts is also a social construct.
Lannister always pays his debts.
Now, Graeber says it's not actually an economic statement. It's a moral statement. After all, isn't paying one's debts what morality is supposed to be all about? Giving people what is due them, accepting one's responsibilities. Indeed, debt is heavily moralized in our society. We judge people who don't live up to their financial responsibilities as harshly as we judge people who lie or cheat or steal. And then we argue that college students are irresponsible if they take out $100,000 to study a topic with dismal employment prospects. It's weird, right? That education has become a system predicated on only studying something that has a direct financial return and not a prospect of becoming a better human being through a wide-ranging study of a variety of subjects in the arts, sciences, and humanities. Well, what are we going to do, you know? Since debt is so wrapped up in morality, it starts to look almost like a religion. And if this sounds weird, we made a video recently about capitalism and religion. You could go watch that. In case this upsets you, pause here, go watch that video, then come back to this part, and you'll feel like you know everything. After all, faith and hope are essential to our financial system. When we collectively think the stock market will do well, it usually does. And economists regularly talk about faith in the dollar. Most money these days is merely what philosopher Philip Goodchild, author of Theology of Money, calls electronic records of promises, making money fundamentally a belief system. But according to Goodchild, in order for money to foster social stability, it needs to come with obligation. Also, Philip Goodchild was my master's degree supervisor. I liked him a lot, but the first day of seminar with him, he scared me very much. But then he didn't scare me because then I learned to like him a lot. See, religion creates spiritual obligation through threats of, say, burning in hell. And the modern economic system creates economic obligation through debt via threats of, dying of starvation. Just as we renounce chocolate or video games or masturbation for Lent, we renounce our property, labor, and time in pursuit of money. To that end, debt is a crucial way of preserving the belief system of money. Goodchild writes, debt ensures participation and cohesion, with promises of wealth and threats of exclusion through a system of social obligations. Debt takes over the role of religion in economic life. Fittingly, some theorists argue that this concept of debt wasn't originally enforced by governments, but by religion. Graeber notes that ancient Vedic poems equate debt with sin and guilt. In the poems, sometimes that debt is circumstantial, like, maybe you hit the craps table too hard. I know that craps table is like a gambling thing, but when I hear that, I visualize someone pooping on a table, because I'm not a gambler. So let me know in the comments if when you hear craps table, you think of just a bunch of dudes just pooping on a table. But debt can also be associated with the burden of death. Because we die, we can think of our lives as being on loan until we finally kick the bucket. The Vedas suggests that human existence is itself a form of debt. The idea being that we owe someone for our existence the moment we get yanked from our mom's womb. This existential debt was once managed by religion because it was like a debt to God. But today, of course, major debts are managed by the state. So we have various debts to society, which have been translated into assorted networks of societal obligation. But all these obligations are part of a social agreement, not some unbreakable bond or natural force beyond human control. And interestingly enough, the attitude towards debt in religious texts often contradict our common moral precept that people must repay their debts. For example, Goodchild notes that Jesus was hardly on the banker's side. He literally declares that you can't serve both God and money. The Lord's Prayer also famously mentions debt. Forgive us our debts as we forgive our debtors. Indeed, the entire crucifixion was depicted as a means for Jesus to pay humanity's spiritual debt, and thus render us forgiven. And this concept appears repeatedly in the New Testament. If I may quote the Bible, having canceled the charge of our legal indebtedness, which stood against us and condemned us, he has taken it away, nailing it to the cross. Feels very pastoral to read you the Bible. Let me know in the comments if you want a series of videos where I just read you the Bible in soft and dulcet tones. Now, this all makes it seem somewhat ironic that the Christian conservatives on the Supreme Court oppose debt forgiveness. Easing up on people who owe you money even dates back to the Old Testament, where we find the law of Jubilee, which mandates debt forgiveness in Sabbath years. Quote, at the end of every 7 years, thou shalt make a release. Every creditor that lendeth aught unto his neighbor shall release it. That's in the Bible, and all these people, I don't want to be mean, but it's like people in the American government who are just like Christianity, God, Christian moral principles are also these people who are just like, oh, businesses are important and you owe the businesses and the financial companies your money. And it's just like, what book are you reading? What book are you reading? Because the Bible doesn't say to do that. While canceling debt is viewed by many in today's America as offering some of us a free lunch, Abrahamic religions framed the notion around forgiveness and mercy. So yes, according to some thinkers, we all have a debt to society. But the punitive and predatory nature of many college loans feels very different from owing your next door neighbor for that time they spotted you some corn. When debt is forgiven, it's not like wiping the slate clean or pretending a debt never existed. It's more like an act of mercy or a gift. We live in a society of crisscrossing debts, one where we can and should expect to do and receive favors from one another for our survival. But the main sticking point for folks who oppose debt forgiveness seems to be unfairness. Some people choose to take on debt while others did not. Why should the tax money of someone who's never taken out a loan foot someone else's bill? Also, it's just very interesting to the people that are like, oh, I don't want my taxes to pay for your student loan debt. First of all, it's not like when you do your taxes, there's like a little category where they show that you're paying for that. Second of all, we have like $1 trillion military budgets every year, and that's fine. That's fine. Just more missiles, more drones. That's great. I love it. I love it. I love it. But then you don't want to pay for like some teachers to get their debt forgiven. I don't know, grow up. If that's you in the comments, defend yourself. Well, here's where it's helpful to consider the argument of philosopher Soren Mao, who contends that under capitalism, every worker subject is in fact an indebted subject. Now, by his estimations, a society ruled by capital is one where the worker incurs a transcendental debt at birth. For Mao, on its most basic level, debt is a promise to pay. For him, the debt we promise to pay is our lifetime of labor, upon which our very survival hinges. He notes the way the rise of wage labor in the 16th and 17th centuries was resisted by those who didn't own property. These folks were, according to Marx, more inclined to become vagabonds and robbers and beggars than sell off their labor for the benefit of their employers. We have a video, a recent one on Marx, that gets into this in detail. You can check that out. Again, I'm not telling you this for clicks, but because if you find this interesting, I think you'll like it. That benefit is known as surplus value. The idea is that if you were actually being paid the worth of the product you make, your employer could never turn a profit. Thus, their profit is entirely reached by necessarily underpaying their workers, meaning that we all get underpaid so that our bosses or corporate entities can produce profit. Unless, of course, you own the means of your own production. Now, it's a small wonder then that, as philosopher Silvia Federici recounts, the hatred of wage labor was so intense that many proletarians preferred to risk the gallows. Of course, eventually wage labor became the norm. And now, according to Mao, capitalists can rely on our own will to live to fuel our hustle. That will is strong enough for us to tolerate an indebted life where we owe all our future labor in exchange for maybe getting a roof over our heads and a decent supper. Or as Marx puts it, the wage worker has permission to live only insofar as he works for a certain time for the capitalist. In this state of what Mao calls mute compulsion under capitalism, it becomes almost impossible to consider or enact any social or material changes, no matter how much we may hate our boss. If you really hate your boss, just shout it out in the comments and tell us why. We won't snitch. Mao writes, class domination thereby inserts itself on a transcendental level, where the valorization of value becomes the condition of possibility of social reproduction. That's all to say, it's hard to even think about starting the revolution when you're working 2 jobs. Having student loan debt, then, is like having a debt on top of this sort of eternal debt. It's particularly tragic when you consider that people with student loan debts borrowed money in hopes of making themselves more attractive to a job market to which they've owed their labor since birth. Add to that the racial and gendered imbalances baked into the crisis, because women owe 2/3 of all student debt, while black graduates owe nearly twice as much debt on average as their white counterparts. All of this is to say, the nature of our economic order is such that unless you inherited a regional chain of used car dealerships, you owe your labor in exchange for the right to live with even a modicum of dignity. From this perspective, we're all lifelong debtors, even if we never borrowed money from Sally Mae. So maybe we could all stand to be a little more forgiving. Or as Graeber puts it, it seems to me that we are long overdue for some kind of biblical style jubilee. It would be salutary not just because it would relieve so much genuine human suffering, but also because it would be our way of reminding ourselves that money is not ineffable, that paying one's debts is not the essence of morality. And it's interesting that here we have the anarchist anthropologist, who I assume was also an atheist, saying, let's do Bible stuff on a massive societal scale, while the people who presumably believe in God and all the Bible stuff are like, let's make Wall Street happy? I don't know, guys, doesn't make sense to me. In other words, this means that human life is worth more than the imaginary numbers that we've collectively agreed to care about more than anything else. But hey, what do you all think? When we attach morality to the issue of student loan debts, do we miss the bigger point? Is debt forgiveness the mark of a functional, forgiving society? Or is it just letting people off easy? Let us know what you think in the comments. And seriously, thank you all so much for continuing to watch our videos, to engage in the conversations we're trying to have. It really means a lot to us. And please let us know what you think. We actually care. We read the comments. I maybe read them too much, but I'd love to know what you think. And thank you so much to our patrons. Our patrons are great. If you've ever thought that you like our videos, but that you hate ads, or you want to get our videos early, or you want to be in a Discord server with some of us, or you want extra content from us, then check out our Patreon page. There's a link in the description. It's also the best way to support our channel directly. So if you have a few bucks to give, consider throwing them our way. But if not, I still love you. In the meantime, try to forgive some debts that are owed to you, or burn down a bank that you owe debt to. Either way, it's all biblical, and I'll see you next time.